Well, welcome back. It's Mission Monday again, and I'm here. This is the third time with my friend Paul Snyder from Papua, Indonesia. I'm always wanting to say Papua New Guinea because I knew a bunch of missionaries from there. And we've been talking about how he got to the mission field, and we started with his conversion, and then we went on to sanctification, how God worked in his life, and then something of calling. Now we're going to start this time with getting on an airplane with your wife and your children. And so tell us what was going on.
So when we were ready to leave, you talk about a lot of emotions. As you know, I mean, you've been through it. You remember those times where you said goodbye.
But I was single.
Oh, you were single at the time. That's right.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, so we had said goodbye to family and friends, which was difficult. I mean, it's, missionaries, or ones that are aspiring to be missionaries, spend as much time with family as you can in the midst of hard work, because it'll be 3 to 4 years on average, if nothing else happens, before you see them again. So we boarded the plane, and we had 2 suitcases per family member. We bought those big action packers and just stuffed them full. Things we thought we could get.
And how old were both your children?
My son was 3.
Oh my!
And my daughter my son Lane was 3. My daughter Marianne, she was 18 months, or was it? Either Lane was 4 or Marianne was 2, something in that area.
Now he keeps looking over that way because his wife is over there telling him to get everything.
She's motioning, going.
Okay.
So very small children. And, not sure what the future would bring. I remember my mom saying to me, give it 6 months to make it feel like home. And she was right. She was right.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell missionaries today. Give it 6 months.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of emotions. You're going to be homesick. A lot of stuff's going to happen within that first 6 months. And it did.
Right.
And so it's a time to where you just trust in the promises of God and realize this is not about you. Mm-hmm. This is about proclaiming His gospel no matter what comes. And, at the same time, I have to, even after all of our training, Trish and I went through a lot of cross-cultural training with the regards of romanticism, because a lot of missionaries, they romanticize about the mission field, and I did it. And even after all the training we went through, I still romanticized. I mean, it's just in our nature. It's in our flesh. And I would encourage every missionary that's leaving not to romanticize one little thing, because you'll get smacked down very quick.
I was, for me, it was a completely different, I think, mission. Peru was in a time of social unrest and upheaval and war and things like that, but I was still in Lima for the first few years. And there's just hardly anything about the Peruvian culture that I do not, that bothers me. I mean, the food, the people, everything about it was, I'm sure, a lot easier for me because of that. But what I discovered was the 6-month point is, for me, everything was new and exciting for 6 months. And then after 6 months, you realize this is where I'm going to live. And that's when it set in for me that it would require endurance, because even though I loved and still do the Peruvian culture and food and people and everything else, you still think about Christmas. You think about your mom, and you think about your family, and you think about all the things that you used to do. And it does, that 6 months is a good, that's a cutoff point.
It is. It's a good cutoff point, because, you're getting adjusted to the language, you're learning it, you're trying to figure out how to say things, you're sometimes making a donkey out of yourself by the way you speak, and you're trying to get adjusted to the way they think, their worldview, their culture, their food, every situation, the way they act, respond, their emotions. I mean, everything just it hits you, and it was good advice. It was good advice to not just be so shocked and say, because I've seen it. A lot of people have come out and they're gone within just a few months because they just didn't think it would be this way.
Right.
And that goes back to how they were, a lot of their training in the States and how they romanticize different things before the field.
Now, so you land. What major city did you land in when you landed from the U.S.?
Well, we spent 1 year in Bandung, where
Okay.
Matt's at.
Where Matt is.
We spent 1 year there learning the language. We did 9 units with the local school there and learned about the culture of the Sundanese and the Javanese. It was a great year. It was a great year to learn. There was hardships there. Just to be honest, again, romanticizing missions, you don't see your partner, carrying you on the back of a motorcycle down in pouring rain because you have dysentery and he's holding a sample to give to the nurse.
Right.
Because you are doubled over in pain and you're soaking wet by the time you get there.
Now, that was just in Jakarta?
That was just in Bandung.
In Bandung, yeah.
So we spent the first few months with our stomachs just constantly churning.
Yeah. I know that. I know that feeling.
After 2 months straight of diarrhea, you wonder why you're here.
Yeah.
And that's just reality.
Yeah.
So, and I tell
But it
people
does
that.
get better. You start
It does.
adjusting
It does.
and everything to the culture. So you were in Bandung for a year, and then where did you go?
Then after Bandung, we went straight to Papua. We
Is
landed
that
in
a-
Sentani.
How long a flight is that from Bandung to there?
It's 5 hours.
And is that it's on a regular like DC-8 or something? It's
Yeah,
like
it's on a-
DC-10.
Yeah, it's like a 737. So it's a
Okay.
big plane. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's a big
so
plane.
you make it there, and then is it another flight into the bush, or what
That's
do you
right.
do
So
there?
we set up there in town. We rent a house because most missionaries, and you need it, if you're going to do tribal interior, you find a place there where you can come out and rest, especially when
Yes.
you're sick. You need that. A place where you can study, a place where you can kind of regroup and buy supplies and get everything ready for the next time interior. So we had a place in Sentani. And then from Sentani, it's an hour and a half flight by a Kodiak plane. Hour and a half flight south into the interior lowland jungle.
Now, Sentani, how big is that?
Sentani is around 75,000 people, last estimate. 75, and just in Sentani. So you have the capital with all these 4 major cities, including Sentani, Jaipura, Sentani, Waina. There's a couple 100,000 people, easy.
So would you fly with your family into the bush, stay there for how long, and then come back?
Yes, we'd fly in as a family. We'd never go alone. I mean, this is a ministry where you live with your wife and children. You make a setup in the jungle. So it was usually we spent 3 to 6 months. We did some 6-month stints in the interior, but at 6 months, that's become you're just walking out with your tongue hanging out because you are just so tired, and because it's a 24/7 job. You're never off in tribal ministries, at least in Papua, Indonesia.
Well, now describe the house you lived in the bush.
So we built a house in Denawage. It's made out of ironwood.
Uh-huh.
And
We use that for longbows, for the
Yeah,
handle on the
yeah.
longbow, yeah.
yeah, so it's a tough wood. I mean,
Yeah.
and it endures. So the termites don't eat it, but some of the boards that we have were not ironwood, we found out, and the termites just destroyed them. But we built a house that was ventilated, had screen all the way around, 6-foot walls with a 2.5-foot screen at the top, a zinc roof, and we have 6 water tanks, solar system, 9 solar panels for our
But now we're
batteries,
talking about plank floor,
plank floor,
cracks,
everything.
see through the cracks.
Everything. But here's the thing, I love carpentry, so I promised my wife if we moved in the jungle, it's hard enough to live there,
Yes.
as you know. So I promised that I would keep it sealed as much as possible. So I spent years sealing that house up.
Over and over again.
Over and over. It's a constant. I mean, you feel like Mr. Fix-It.
Yeah.
You're wanting so bad to do ministry and teach these people and just spend time with them, yet you've got to make things good for your family, and everything just seems to be falling apart left and right.
But when we were traveling, I would take a tent, and I'd put it inside a hut and then take the rain fly off of it because it would be so hot. But you could sleep in that tent knowing that the bird-eating tarantulas and the vampire bats would not eat you at night. That was always the great. But here's the thing, even in that really good North Face tent, you'd have to move it every 3 or 4 days because somehow insects would start getting inside of it. So I can't imagine staying in one place with just planks and obvious cracks.
Yes.
The different type, because that was the hardest thing for me. It wasn't anacondas, it wasn't piranhas, it wasn't the dangerous river, it was just the insects.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Papua is the same way as Peru. I mean, it's just flooded. And, I left saying, I don't mind the insects, but when we left for furlough, I'm going, I hate these things. I don't care if I see another insect.
Yeah.
I mean, the mosquitoes alone tried to kill me, so
I know.
So,
now, just real quick, how many times have you had malaria?
3 times.
3 times.
3 times malaria. All Trish and the kids have had it at least once. Then I contacted dengue fever.
That's the bad one.
That's the bad one in 2015.
Well, malaria is bad.
Right.
Dengue is even worse.
At least they have a medicine for malaria now that will help you. But dengue fever in 2015, and then in 2018 I came down with chikungunya, and then.
All right, explain what that is to everyone.
So all those dengue and chikungunya fever are all mosquito-borne viruses, and it's you get bit, and usually within four days or so, you're starting to showing symptoms. Dengue fever is hemorrhagic fever,
right?
And so your water leaks out your blood veins.
Right.
So if you're not put on IV, it can be very deadly. Then there's also mental, the side of dengue, which happened. Chikungunya is also a form of that, but it affects the joints, high fever, and it affects the joints, all your major joints, just excruciating pain.
Now, you also suffered paralysis, didn't you?
So there's a good medical article about chikungunya fever related to Guillain-Barré syndrome. So after chikungunya, I came out of the hospital, 2 weeks later, I came down with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which paralyzed my body and exposed all the nerves took all the sheath and lining off the nerves. So I spent some time in the hospital doing all the treatments and therapy, and still some things are paralyzed, but it's been a slow process.
It's people, we're going to talk about the rough side of the ministry, but in some of the places in the jungle, it can wreak havoc on your body and wreak havoc on your mind.
Yes. I looked at Trish one day and I said, I got to get out of here. In 2000, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the February of 17, I kind of had a mental breakdown, and my church said, get off the island, and they sent us to Bali for a month.
Yeah.
So, there will be, if people want to serve in these hard places, they will suffer.
Yeah.
They will go through these things, and it's nothing to be afraid of because Christ will lift you up. He's even nearer in the suffering, and it's for His glory.
He's closer.
That's right. Yes.
But I remember one time there was this one Apu. He was a leader near Bajo Canampa, and I'd gotten to the point where I could run around the jungle just in a pair of shorts, type of thing, just like everybody else. But he was over there one day, and I noticed he had a thing made out of kind of, I don't know, it was like several dried leaves, and he was kind of just doing this to himself to keep the insects off. And I asked him, I said, how do you do it? How do you, how's this not bother you? Sometimes it just kills me. And he just looked at me and says, what makes you think it doesn't bother me? He said, it bothers me as much as it does you. And, I've never had to wrestle with an insect in the United States.
But you do there.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Right.
And it's those types of things. But this is why also you must be sure that you are called. Because sometimes it's only that call that deep conviction, this is where God wants me to be, that gives you the strength to be there.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And because, I mean, I've seen guys almost, I thought they were just going to start screaming and running through the jungle, hitting trees and stuff, you know, after a while.
Right.
And again, I didn't go through anything that you've gone through. So we've talked about that a bit. How was it like for your wife and your children? I mean, well, first of all, describe the tree people. Describe the Corway, the treehouse people, or whatever.
Sure.
Way that, so that people get an idea of where you were living.
Sure. They are 4,000, give or take, tribal group in the lowland parts. So once you go over the highlands, it's just flat swamp all the way to the coast. And these are the treehouse people. That was coined by National Geographic. They also did an article years ago, the Smithsonian did an article called it Sleeping with Cannibals. So their history has been that. The last confession, I believe, was in 2006 of that happening. They are people that are animistic. They believe in an evil spirit called Sipe, and they try to appease him by they'll hang pig heads, fish fat, pig fat from the rafters of their roof. They'll soak the entrance pole with fat so that the evil spirit will be pleased and the witches won't come up from the jungle floor into their treehouse.
Now, what is that? I mean, I know that's the reason why they live way up in the trees, because of the witches. What do they mean by witches?
Well, they believe there is a witch that roams the jungle floor.
Like a shaman?
Yeah,
maybe.
Something like that. That comes from, and I'm still learning about this too, because getting in the Korowai mind regarding their mythology and what they believe is really tough. But they believe that a witch still roams the jungle floor, and that these are evil spirits. And so they take precautions. For instance, they'll when they dig a hole to plant a post for say a 10-meter treehouse, they'll cover that hole with banana leaves so that the evil spirit won't escape. Those kinds of things. So everything is done. I mean, I've slept in tree houses with my partner, and overnight, and we've watched them in action, and it's everything they do is out of fear. I mean, they live a life of fear
Of these demons.
and trying to appease this evil spirit called Sipe, which they'll worship sacred rocks, water, trees, certain areas off limits to people. You don't chop this tree down. This water you don't mess with. These rocks are sacred. And we've been teaching against that for years, that there is this one triune God that exists over all, and he's more powerful than this evil spirit. And so we just started with their animism and tried to work and, apply the gospel at every setting. So these treehouse people, they're an individualistic culture. They're not very communal. They're not what we now have 25 villages. That was the providence of God, because they don't normally do that. They have their own they have their own land with their own clan in one treehouse. And so you'll have 25 people in one treehouse.
So it's a clan as a family.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And now, once they become believers, do they come back down to the ground? Do they?
Well, actually, they started coming to the ground before. I mean, and you got to give credit to the Dani evangelists for this area.
And when you say Dani, what
Right.
do you mean?
So that is a tribe. It's the biggest tribe in Papua. You might hear Lani. Dani is the same thing. Lani is more formal. The Lani people, the gospel came to the Lani people in the highlands first because of World War II. When they were flying over, they saw people down there, and they said, we're going to go. And that got back to the States and to Australia, Canada, and missionaries started flooding the highlands. And so that the believers were born out of that. And now those Dani Christians have been wanting to saturate the gospel of the lowlands, because it's still new work. I mean, there are 42 tribes to my south that still have nobody.
Now, is it like in Peru, for example, we had the highland? I'm not talking about the mountains like the Andes, but I'm talking about the high jungles coming down from the Andes. And in many places, it would have been very easy for me to set up and live. It was beautiful. But when you got down into the lowland where the rivers, the swamps, the cochas were, that's where it really got tough. The heat,
Oh, it's
the
brutal.
insects,
It's
the
brutal.
reptiles, everything, just everywhere.
I look at guys, and you know it's just as well as I do, guys like John Payton.
Yeah.
I mean, he lived in those conditions, and we did, but we had antibiotics, medicine, comforts. We even had one fan in the house to kind of, and we had a clean river to jump in 3 times a day to cool off. So yeah, how did these guys go without? I mean, I had boils, seems like every week.
Yeah.
And I could take an antibiotic, and they're gone within 2 weeks.
But Peyton didn't.
But Peyton didn't have any of that. I mean, so it's
So I noticed you have a picture about, 3 feet by 2 feet in your office
of John Payton. Yes.
John Payton.
Yes.
And if you're a young missionary, or you're aspiring to be a young missionary, read everything you can about John Payton.
Yes. It'll change your life. Yes.
Yeah.
Good man. So I would tell, anyone wanting to go into that type of environment, it's not going to be easy. It will be, and the thing, Paul, with despite the insects and the heat and all the sicknesses, the major area where we suffered as a couple and as myself as a minister of the gospel was through what you see Paul talk about in 2 Corinthians 11, where he talks about his sufferings. He lists those, and then he says those that claim to be brothers. Mm-hmm. And so that was where I suffered the most, from men that claimed to be there in the name of Christ and yet were against the gospel.
Right.
And so we battled those men for years.
Well, the battle is the spiritual battles, and to pour your life into someone for a few years and then have them just go apostate and just turn away, But then there are those others that are shining examples. Well, what I want to do right now, with the more minutes that we have, is just for our young, because we have a lot of homeschool kids that watch this and stuff. Talk to me about some missionary stories. Wrestling crocodiles and fighting pigs and everything else. And then in our next session, we're going to talk about what's most important, and that is, people what happened? What did the gospel produce? What did you see while you were there? But first of
Look
all,
forward to that. Yeah.
So
Okay, so some
I
stories.
always get asked the question, did you
Yes,
wrestle an anaconda? Did you do that?
I get them too. It's one that, So I'll share one that happened in 2009. I was going downriver. We were going to do some teaching at a village about 2 hours down.
Now, did you go down in a boat? Because when Jamie went with
Yeah.
you guys went downriver without a boat. You just jumped in the river and bobbed your way down to the next village.
Yes, we went down in a dugout canoe.
Oh, so
The
luxury.
Corwide- Yes, that's right. It took us 8 hours to get just a few miles. But the storm came up, and you got to be careful on that river because it can rise very quickly. It's very dangerous. And so there was this tree house off to the providence of God, as you look at it, like we were just talking about earlier, tree house off to the right. And there was this clan living there. And so we stopped. We didn't know them yet. We hadn't met them. The storm's coming up fast. They recognized one of the Donnie missionaries, one of the Donnie evangelists. They invite us up reluctantly. The women would cover their head, and they would turn their children around like this, but they allowed us to come up into the treehouse. And so my partner and I, we slept, because we're heavier, we slept against the main tree in the treehouse, because there was probably 25 people in this treehouse, and it was just rocking. And it was very intimidating to sleep there. So the lady, one of the Corwide ladies, she moves her sago bread paste. They make bread from a sago palm tree. So they're moving all this bread so I can stretch out, because I'm tall like you, and I need to stretch out. And spiders and roaches just run everywhere. I mean, it's just on. And I'm going, this is where I got to sleep. Okay. So the night goes on. We're singing some hymns with Perrin, and she's telling some Bible stories. And Trevor and I back up to lean up against the tree, and I've got this mosquito net pulled up over my body. And so I'm drifting in and out. I probably got an hour of sleep that night. I'm drifting in and out, and I'd wake up and I'd feel something and turn on the light, and there'd be a spider in there or a roach, And so I'd get it out and go back to sleep. Well, the big one came when I've drifted off, and I felt a bite on my ankle near a vein, and so I immediately sat up and I slapped it. I could feel some fur. I mean, I just hit it. I mean, it almost like one of those super cartoons, where Bugs Bunny's running like this, you just, and so come to find out, and then I shine the light, and there's these 2 imprint marks with blood coming out in my ankle, and it was a rat that had climbed. They climb up the treehouse at night and chew on the tribal people's feet, because their feet are hard, calloused, and so they nibble on all that deposit. Yeah. Well, mine are tender and
You're a
soft.
tenderfoot.
That's right. And so he just clamped down, and I mean, that was it. So next morning I woke up, and my partner looked at it, and it had already become infected. There was starting to be a ring around it, and it was a rat bite. And I went back to Centani with rat bite fever. Had to take penicillin. So it's always happens in the treehouse, no matter if it's 5 foot off the ground or 20 foot. Rats are coming in and chewing on the people's feet.
And sometimes you guys actually had violent encounters with some of the men, right?
Yes.
Just who were opposed to the gospel, or just evil men.
Yes, evil men. I opposed a guy for 3 years, every Sunday. In fact, Paul, it became where Sundays were not enjoyable. I dreaded going to worship because I knew I'd have to face these men. And you can ask my wife, I mean, it was so tired and so exhausted from dealing with especially this one guy that wanted to take control, that was not qualified to be there. And he was very violent toward the Korowai, and then want to get up and teach and lead the church, and then threaten again throughout the week and want to get up and teach. So I opposed him, and then it came to some fruition with several times in the village of him raising a machete, and the Korowai coming to my aid. So it was, that God used the Korowai, and God used unbelievers in that sense, in that instance. And now some of those are walking with the Lord. But that man has been removed. This particular man, he murdered his wife. Wow. He beat her to death, and then wanted to still be in charge of the church. And it was pretty rough.
Well, I've heard a lot of things that have gone on there, and that's just part of it. And it sounds kind of, again, romantic, but when you're in the middle of it, it can be terrifying.
Yes.
It can be terrifying.
I'm not some Superman. Right. I mean, nobody sees what's happening and churning in my stomach when somebody's coming at you violently. Yeah. I mean, sometimes the flesh wants to take over and guard its safety. Right. And the stomach churns. Yeah. So it's not where I'm just standing there ready to take it. I mean, it's scary moments. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, what's the funniest moment?
The funniest moment. I think, I don't know. The most
there weren't any.
They were hard for no. Just spending time with the kids down at the river. I mean, we would try to get away as a family, because my children, when they were little at that age, we were followed everywhere. And so they wanted to be alone with dad and mom and go down the river, play. And so we would try to make time for that. And I think those were the most enjoyable, being together down at the river, whether it's once, twice a day, whatever, having fun together. If I think of something too funny, I'll let you know.
In these situations, and I'm going to get your wife in here to interview her as soon as I can convince her, but a strong woman.
Very strong. Stronger
necessary.
Than she thinks. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen her take a lot in the village. Yeah. And for what the village requires, she's very hardy. Yeah. She's a hardy person, and she's very tough. Yeah. And she won't say she is, but she is. I mean, I've seen her work all day with medical. I mean, left and right, exhausted, and then provide for her family inside. take care of things in the home. I mean, it's tough, and so she should be commended.
Yeah, I remember one time my wife and I, we were up in the high jungle, and we were sleeping in what I guess you would call a corn bin. It was an adobe hut, probably, I don't know, 1.5 meters wide, and 3 meters long, you know, and full of corn shocks and stuff. And we were asleep. I woke up, and I see a flashlight going like this. And I look over at my wife, and she's got the flashlight. And I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Shh, shh." And I said, "What? Quiet." And then she goes like that. "Look at that rat." And it, without the tail, it was like this big. She goes, "Look at that rat." And I said, "That's the biggest rat I've ever seen in my life." She goes, "That's nothing. Look at these." And there were like rats everywhere. And then she goes, "Well, let's go to sleep." Shut off the light and rolled over. Now, if it had been a tarantula, it had been a different story. She'd have made a door right through the adobe brick. But yeah, you know, that's what, you know, it was known in Peru that even single missionary women, you know, expat, you know, from other countries, that would go into places where men were too afraid to go. And I mean, it's a story in itself of how much God has used women that were just, you know, Mary Slessor, a Calabar type, you know, just so strong. And that's some of the unsung heroes, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Both single women and wives of missionaries that have carried the load.
Yes.
All right, well, in our next one, all I want to hear about is people getting, you know, preaching, teaching, people getting converted and learning to walk, and then some of the indigenous men and women that are serving now as missionaries. Okay?
Look forward to it. Good.
Well, I hope this has been helpful and enjoyable. And remember, if you're a young person and you're thinking about being a missionary, prepare yourself, discipline yourself for hardship, but most importantly, discipline yourself in the Word of God and prayer. We only have a few instruments that are actually from God and supernatural: the Word of God, intercessory prayer, and a godly life. And if you have those, you can be a useful servant of God on the mission field. And it doesn't take men and women of great courage. It just takes men and women who are compelled, constrained, pushed, not by their great love for Christ, but the reality of Christ's great love for them. That's all it takes. That makes the weak strong. All right, well, God bless you.